Hello, everybody. This is Find Your Flourish. I'm Avrohom, your CEO or Chief Encouragement Officer. And today I have the distinct privilege of having my dear friend, Dun Kaufman, as my esteemed guest today. So Dun is a computer programmer who became a marketer, who became a psychotherapist, and he's just an all-round amazing guy, and I am looking so forward to this interview.
Thank you.
So, Dan, that's quite a resume. You come from a computer programmer to a psychologist, to a marketer, to a psychologist. How did that trajectory go? Like, tell me the story. What's your journey?
I'll try and keep it short. So the truth is, my father he's very logical, analytical. My mother's very creative. And I feel like I got the best of both worlds. And when I had to make a decision to go to what am I going to major in university, I really wanted to go into the arts. And I had been traveling around Europe, backpacking around Europe that summer. I had applied for the fine arts program between York University and Sheridan. And unfortunately, they didn't tell you when your portfolio date is, when the portfolio interview is. And I got a letter, and my portfolio date was a week later, but I was in Europe. So I actually couldn't go and do the interview. And so as a backup, I said, you know what, let me do as many electives as I can the first year. I'll switch in the second year. And I ended up focusing on computer programming, which from my father's side, I love that stuff. I was playing around with computers. I joke that I was born on the internet. And then, so I did all of that. The next summer, I figured, you know what, I'm going to go travel around Europe, a couple of places I missed. I'll do it way earlier. So then this way, when they give me the portfolio date, I'll be back. Unfortunately, I didn't realize that because I had missed it the previous year and I was already in, they bumped me up to the front and my portfolio date was like 2 days later, but I was in Europe again. So I just figured, you know what, I'll finish my IT at York University. I got into computers, programming, loved it. And then I started working for a marketing agency right out of university. And I enjoyed that part of the business a lot more than what I was doing. So I decided to go back to school for marketing. And that was my career for a number of years. And then I decided to go out on my own. And then when I went out on my own and I tried to solicit, prospects in terms of clients, I enjoyed that part of the relationship a lot more. And I realized, you know what, I like this part a lot more, and I'm not really enjoying the actual work part. And I also felt, if we're going to bring God into the picture as well, I felt at the time, I can't imagine that God put me here on this earth to help somebody sell more windows. Like, it can't be that that's my task in this world. And so I started transitioning. I started with life coaching and then hypnotherapy and then officially a psychotherapist. So that's how I ended up doing what I'm doing. And I absolutely love what I do now, which I could never say before.
Amazing. That's interesting. The name of our podcast, as you know, is Find Your Flourish. And it sounds like you found your flourish.
Totally found my flourish.
So there's a lot to unpack there. I want to go back to the beginning.
Yeah.
You said that your parents kind of, it sounds like left brain and right brain. Would that be an accurate statement? More artistic, more engineering, empirical, mathematical.
Right.
So you're the combination of both.
Right.
So often I help my clients in my coaching practice solve problems. That's essentially what I am, is a problem solver. And what do you think is the input? Which do you think is more important? The left brain or the right brain? Is it the analytical side of our thinking, or is it the creative side of our thinking that leads to the best outcomes and the best decisions?
I don't know if I can say what's best as a general rule. I would say it's based on the individual. I've listened to so many different influencers who say, wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning every single day and go to sleep by 7. If that works for you, great, but it doesn't necessarily work for everyone, and you're not going to be able to flourish or thrive if that's not what your body can handle, right? I've got 6 little kids. I'm not waking up at 4 in the morning unless one of them is waking me up. Right? So, but it doesn't work for me. So I think we really need to appreciate who we are first and then base it on that. And I find that if there's little resistance, then that's usually the right path. If there's too much resistance, right, like left brain, right brain, let's approach it from an analytical standpoint, but I'm more creative and floaty and spiritual, there's going to be so much resistance that it's not going to necessarily work for that person. So I think it's really a matter of who are we first, what works for us, and then go based on that.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, you're saying when it comes to an individual, you'll have an aptitude or you'll have some strength in one area or another, and you lead for you lead to your strengths, like you utilize your strengths to bring solutions to the issues that you're facing in your life. So in terms of teams, as you were talking, I was thinking, what about teams? Like, what if there's more than one individual? I understand each individual has strengths. Do you think that there's value in having a team that is diverse and has diverse skill set and maybe complementary and maybe even personalities that might clash? Is that more valuable, or is it more valuable, do you find, that teams work together?
I would zoom out first and I would say, what is the goal for this team? What are they tasked to do? Right? And depending on what their end goal is, then it will dictate if this team is going to cohesively work or not. Right? If we're trying to solve let's say a programming problem, right, at a software engineer, and we have a team full of very creative individuals, that might not be a very cohesive team. Right? So it really is a matter of what is your end goal now as a unit. Before we describe the individual, what's the end goal, and let's go with the least amount of resistance. I would say the same model should work for a team as well.
So not a significant difference to the individual strength.
No, right? Like sometimes you do need, opposing opinions to be able to have a much more resourceful solution, right? A much more expansive lateral way of thinking, depending on what the problem is you're trying to solve. Mm-hmm. But if the problem you're trying to solve is very, rigid, then perhaps an analytical team is going to be a lot more cohesive and a lot quicker to solve that problem, right? So I think it really depends very much on what is the goal.
Right. So you're also a psychologist.
Psychotherapist.
Thank you for correcting me. You're also a psychotherapist. And as a psychotherapist, I know you've done couples work. Is that correct?
Yes.
So how would this conversation translate into a couple relationship? So, they say opposites attract. I guess that may be true to get you into the marriage. But do opposites continue to be attractive as the pressures of life mount? What happens if you have a husband and a wife, or two people in a relationship where there's strong differences in their strengths? How does that impact the relationship? What unique challenges might it impose on the relationship, or maybe unique strengths that it gives to the relationship when people are different?
Right. I find that most people have a very strong assumption of what relationships and marriages are meant to be like. And when you're rigid on your way of thinking of this is the way it's supposed to be, I have a value that, we do everything together, right? We're best of friends and we do absolutely everything together. And the other partner is like, no, we have, you're my life mate and we have an intimate relationship and I'm faithful and exclusive to you, right? But I also have a very strong social network, and that's very important to me. I have my hobbies. I have things outside of the house that are very important for me. And so there seems to be a conflict. This individual is saying, well, you don't love me because you're not spending all this time with me. And the other one's saying, no, I love you, but this is what I need in my life. And my experience is that we have to we have to expose the assumptions first and see if there's a place for us to work. And as long as we can get to an understanding of each individual, this is who I am, and this is what's important for me. This is who I am. This is what's important for me. Based on those values, can we still meet in the middle? I'm willing to give a little bit. But again, going back to that first conversation, if there's too much resistance, it's not going to work. If there's just the right amount of resistance, then yeah, you can actually grow into a beautiful relationship. Kind of like going to the gym, right? If you're working out and you put on too much weight, that's way too much resistance. You're probably going to tear a muscle. It's not going to be enjoyable. It's bad stress. You have the right amount of pressure, good stress, you're going to grow and become stronger. So it's very much, I guess the running theme that I'm experiencing is I don't have general rules. I'm very much you have to take a look at the dynamics of the individual situation.
Yeah, when it comes to humans, I guess the only rule is that there are no rules. Each person is so complex and so different.
So I will say that there's one rule that I've seen is consistent,
Yes.
which is, from my experience, all humans have two very basic needs. And this is true everywhere. How it comes out is different for each individual. And those two very basic needs is safety and significance. We all need that. And if we don't have that experience in these interpersonal relationships, we're not going to desire these relationships, be it parent-child, co-workers, husband and wife. If those two elements are not in there in that dynamic of the relationship, it's not going to thrive.
Safety and significance.
Safety and significance.
Drill down a little bit on that. So what's your definition of safety and what's the definition of significance?
So to totally dumb it down, I would say safety would be a safety of really just the body, right? And could even be stuff like how an individual speaks, right? I don't know how much experience you have with, the Israeli father, right? The Israeli father talks sturdily and loudly and be like, why are you yelling? And he'd be like, I'm not yelling, right? But that's just the way they communicate, right? I don't know if you've ever been in an Israeli restaurant. Everyone's yelling at each other. You're like walking in, you're like, what's going on? They hate each other. No, they love each other, right? But from a nervous system standpoint, for a child or a baby, right? Like that's not necessarily feeling safe, even though there might be a tremendous amount of love there. So generally speaking, safety is the body, physical safety. Now the emotional safety, that's more from the significant standpoint. And that's, do I feel important here? Do I feel seen? Do I feel heard? Do I feel understood? That's the significance piece.
This is such fantastic stuff. I'm so happy that you're here, Dan, and you throwing out value bombs over there, and our listeners and viewers are truly fortunate to gain from your wisdom.
Thank you.
So thank you.
I'll tell you how far the significance piece goes.
Please.
I don't know why, but a couple of years ago, I had a slew of new clients coming in from the banking industry, different banks. I don't know why or how. They weren't referring each other.
Oh, I've worked in the banking industry. I understand it perfectly. Why?
And all of these clients who came to me were either on stress leave or just about to go on stress leave.
Wow.
And when we drilled down to it, they would bring in things like overworking, too much expectations, all of this. And when we got down to it, and I started doing role playing and thought experiments with them, and I acted like their immediate supervisor, and I spoke to them, right? Like, oh my goodness, I got too much work. And I spoke to them in a way that made them feel significant and understood. They almost consistently said to me, you know what? If my boss spoke to me like this, I'd probably do more work for less pay. That's how important significance is.
Wow. So to flourish, to put
Yeah.
it in other words, you need that safety, that physical safety, that safety of body, safety of space, energy,
Right.
I guess, and you need the significance, that you feel seen, that you feel heard, that you feel respected.
Right. For an
Amazing.
entrepreneur, it's going to be more difficult because they have to provide that for themselves,
Yes.
right? They
The
can't
lonely
necessarily rely
entrepreneur.
that on other people.
Yeah, that is a huge challenge of being the lonely entrepreneur, that you have to go, unless you have a good coach, of course, then that helps. That helps.
But even with a good coach, if it's the wrong, right? I actually when I was doing my consulting agency, right, in marketing, I hired a business coach because it's like, why can't I grow this thing? I have all the skill sets. I know I can make a tremendous amount of money with this. Why can't I grow this? And after a few months, my business coach came into my office and he said, Don, we have to talk. I said, yeah. He goes, we're getting a divorce. I said, why? He says, I can't help you in something you don't want to be helped in, right? Like this isn't what you want to be doing. You have the skills, you have the opportunity, you have the soft skills, you have the hard skills, but you don't want to be doing this, right? I wasn't going back to it. I wasn't feeling significant by helping somebody sell windows, right? And yeah, you can do some mind tricks of like, yeah, but you're helping him provide for his family and all of this. I didn't care. That's what it came down to.
So that precipitated the transition to becoming a psychotherapist.
Very much.
So it's interesting. Computer programmer, marketer, psychotherapist. They're very different. Like, it's not a typical career trajectory that you would like. The average guy starts off as a computer programmer and ends up as a psychotherapist. I guess you're looking after the software, the mental software of human beings. So one could see that there's some similarities there. But it's a very untraditional career trajectory for sure.
Correct.
So there's this concept that we are supposed to be in the image of God, right?
Yes.
But the problem with that is that Jewish faith teaches us that God has no image. So,
That's a nice
so what is the
contradiction.
it's a contradiction there. What is the image that we're supposed to be
Right.
if he has no image? And that's the answer. We should have no image. The minute you have an image, in other words, then
Interesting.
you've limited yourself. You've confined yourself to this is what I am. I am a computer programmer, or I am a marketer. And even if I'm desperately unhappy as a marketer,
Yeah.
it's what I am. So you define yourself. I am. Anything I think you say after the word am in the expression I am is a very limiting thing. It's like, okay, this is your identity and it's nothing else. But you've successfully really transitioned in a very deep way. So what do you think is the kind of the key to being able to not pigeonhole yourself, not be confined to a very specific niche or a career path? How do you do that successfully? How do you change, and how do you get people to recognize and support that change? Like, if I could imagine that if a Jewish mother has successfully raised, the pinnacle of Jewish mother's success is to raise a child who's a doctor, and the child walks in one day and says, "Ma, I want to be a marketer or a computer programmer." So how do you make sure that when you want to change and you want to transform and you want to align closer with what your real values are and what your real yearning and mission and purpose is? How do you do that, first of all? How do you make that transition within yourself? And how do you deal with the world around you that may object and may even try and prevent you from making that change?
Right. You said so many things that took my mind on so many different paths, starting with the image of God, the mother, and these two very difficult questions. Difficult in the sense of I think the answer is easily said, hard to execute. From an internal standpoint, I think it's starting to understand that we have a couple of different voices inside of our head. I remember as a kid, people would say, "Don't talk to yourself. People will think you're crazy." Nowadays, everybody says, "Talk to yourself," right? And talk to yourself a lot and listen to what's going on inside your head. I think the more we become attuned to what's going on inside, we'll hear that voice, the quiet voice of growth. It's a little bit resistant, a little bit afraid, but it's guiding us in the right direction. That's that voice of saying, kind of like planting a seed, right? There's always going to be, going back to that, the right amount of resistance will create a good amount of stress, and that's where the real growth comes in. So if we can learn to listen to that voice and typically it sounds like, you're lying in bed, you're in the bathroom, you're watching TV, or whatever's going on, and that voice just keeps repeating itself over and over and over. What if? What if? What if? What if? Right? What if you do this? What if you do this? Right? And you start listening and you hear, oh, it's the same thing happening over and over again. It's saying, what if I go on this? Well, that's too scary, right? Now the question is, why is it so scary? Why am I so afraid to go on this journey? I was totally afraid to. I remember for me, it was kind of like ripping the Band-Aid off when I decided to totally shift my business. And I was so scared to hit the send button. I had written up an email to every single one of my clients at the time, basically saying, as of today, I'm done, right? I couldn't do this transition part, like, slowly transitioning off. I attempted, it just didn't work for me. And I remember just, sitting there with that send. And then that was that quiet voice. The other side is all the resistance you're going to get from the outside world, right? Like, what are you doing? That's so irresponsible. How can you possibly do that? Will you actually succeed? How do you know? Right? So this is where a great coach comes in, right? Where self-determination, self-esteem, confidence comes in. And really what it comes down to is if you feel significant enough, either through a coaching, individually, because you have a good support system, that resistance is not going to be so great because you have people or yourself around you who are encouraging you, who understand you well enough and say, this is a good thing. even though the rest of the world might say otherwise. So you're creating this little microcosm for yourself saying, oh, I'm safe and significant in this world. I'll be okay.
That's beautiful. That's really profound and so true. You know, on my podcast, on this podcast, Find Your Flourish, I often say that my nemesis, the one thing that I'm devoting my whole life to challenging and to vanquishing, is fear. Like fear is such a limiting belief, and it's so pervasive. And I think today in the times that we live, there's so much anxiety, almost like an epidemic of anxiety and fear, and it affects people on so many levels. But one really limiting belief that fear provokes is that you will not succeed in the unknown. Right. And by moving out there from your comfort zone, from that which you know to that which you don't, even if it makes perfect sense, like even if that unknown is where you need to be, like where you deeply, deeply in your soul need to be, fear will come and say, not so fast. Yeah. You're not, yeah, maybe, but maybe somebody else, maybe if you had this, if you had that, if that was in place. So fear is this horrible enemy. And I went for a walk with my wife a couple of days ago, and we walked through a park, and we saw these two young girls. They must have been, 4 to 5 years old. And they were like swinging on the monkey bars. And I said to my wife, it's like such lack of fear and such joy. There was just pure joy in their movement and how they were just climbing on those monkey bars. And my wife and I we were mesmerized, just looking at these two balls of joy, not held back by any fear in the world. Like the grandfather who was watching his two grandchildren, his heart was like flying out of his chest, as was mine and my wife's. But these kids, there was just no fear. And I said to my wife that, Rab Nachman of Breslov said, it's a sin to be old. And it doesn't mean the age on your passport, because that's inevitable. You're just, as we cycle through the seasons of life, we're going to get biologically older. But it's a sin to become old. And I said to my wife, I think that means it's a sin to lose that joy, that joie de vivre, and to replace it with fear. But if you look at the grandfather and at the two onlookers, my wife and myself, like we are so bogged down by fear. Do you find, so I have two questions. Firstly, do you find in your practice, in your therapy, that there's more anxiety currently than there was in the past? Or is it just that I'm becoming more sensitive to it? And second of all, how do you guide people through that so that they shouldn't feel afraid and be able to achieve whatever they want in life?
So regarding the first question, is there more now than before? I think we're calling things now, I think we name things now more anxiety. But speaking with people who have been around for a while, it sounds like it's the same thing over and over, right? It could be if we traveled 200 years ago, I don't know what that would have looked like, but in theory, since the Industrial Revolution, perhaps the anxieties are on the same. What I have been told, and because it's not my clientele, is that the anxiety within, the sub 20-year-old is now increasing, meaning teenagers, children. The anxiety is now, everybody's now anxious and depressed, which is new. But in terms of the adults, it seems to be fairly consistent.
So may I push back a little bit there? So I arrived here in Toronto. I moved to Toronto 7.5 years ago. So that's pre-COVID.
Yeah.
So my wife and I, we arrived in Toronto pre-COVID. And one thing they didn't say in the tourist brochure is that it snows in Toronto. I don't know if that may have put us off, but they didn't say that. So we
only 10 months out of the year.
Yeah, that's true. I shouldn't be too harsh in my condemnation of the weather in Toronto. So we arrive here, and we arrived in December, so that's, the beginning of the winter or the depth of the winter. And there are weather forecasts. And obviously, you look at the weather forecasts with great interest here in Toronto. And the weather forecast says, it will snow so many inches, whatever. It'll report the weather.
Right.
That's true 7.5 years ago. Today, whenever you see a weather forecast, whether it's like, oh, it will snow tomorrow, which in Toronto is not that unusual, it will say weather warning.
Right.
Climate change, Canada climate change. They don't even call it the weather anymore. It's like climate change. It's alarming. Just a simple thing like reporting the weather tomorrow has become such an alarming thing. So, obviously, I don't know about individuals, but I would say my perception of the media is that there's much more fear and anxiety-provoking headlines, and social media feeds are filled with, economic fears, tariffs, political turbulence. There seems to be so much, and the media seems to promote that. That's on the one hand. So I feel, just in my little anecdotal world, it seems that the people I know are more afraid. I mean, let's take something as simple as this. Objectively, teenagers are safer, and elementary age children are safer today than they've ever been.
Correct.
There's less drunk drivers. There's less weather.
Crime, money, food, all of these
food.
things.
There's more food. All of these things. So we are living in probably the safest time in the history of the world to be a child.
Correct.
And yet, parents, at least in the 3D world, in the outer world, obviously, I think on the internet, the internet could be a very dangerous place for children, extremely dangerous. But I think most parents are very concerned about stranger danger, and they won't let their children, in the 1950s, I would say that the majority of children walked home from school. Today, no child walks home from school because parents are too afraid to let their children walk home from school. Parents are too afraid to let their children bruise their knees and, fall off trees and all that. Yet, even though objectively it's safer, the one place where we should be more vigilant, which is online, that parents, don't have any oversight there, or most parents. But that's a separate story. So I'm fascinated by the fact that you say that when you speak to your colleagues who've been therapists for longer than you have, that you say that there's no change, at least in the adult population, when it comes to anxiety and fear. When I see so much fear in the media, and I see so much fear in how parents are raising children. So it's interesting that there's a disconnect there. What do you think that means?
My thoughts are, one, it could be that the qualitative nature of the anxiety is amplified, right? So we're seeing more extreme cases of anxiety, things like OCD, and perhaps even moving into a more psychotic types of actual issues that has grown since 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So there could be that nature that it's almost like a natural, the amount of anxiety in terms of the population, how much of the population struggles with anxiety might be the same, but the intensity of it for those who are suffering with it might be greater. At the same time, it's kind of amusing to me that you brought up the news and all that. My exposure to outside of my family and my clientele is I'm in the anything I sort of consume outside of that is really in the self-improvement, self-growth environment. And so I'm only really exposed to positive things in general. And by chance, I had stopped by the gas station on the way over here, and my phone, when I have it on Bluetooth, the radio automatically always turns on before I connect it back to my Bluetooth. And I was just listening to about 30 or 40 seconds of news. I was like, why do we need to know any of this? Like, it was just so, I was like, this is not helpful to me. I'm not going to be a better person for having heard all of this. So I don't really know if it's gotten worse based on your anecdotal evidence. It seems like, even a snowstorm now is fear inducing. Going back to what you brought in, the being in the image of God. I actually had a different understanding, but you've given me some food for thought of, you're right, like God has no image. So how can we actually, really, we need to humble ourselves. So we're essentially in no image and we can be flowing and open to whatever's coming our way. Prior to that, and I have to do a little bit more thinking about that, my thought regarding being in the image of God, what does that mean? Is if you take a look at what God is, he's the ultimate giver. Right. And so that was my sort of understanding of, if I want to be godlike, I need to become a giver, not a taker, which is the natural transition from a child to an adult. A child takes, and an adult gives. Right. The ideal sort of relationship between a child and an adult. So that was just something that I was thinking about. And just a cute anecdote about the mother who wants their Jewish, son to be a doctor or a lawyer. I had a mentor for many, many years whose son went through law school. Right. And then finally he got his law degree and he took his parents out for dinner and he said, Ma, Dad, here's my degree. I'm becoming a writer. And he ended up writing a TV show for many seasons about lawyers on TV.
Wow.
But you definitely gave me this concept of, what does it mean to be, when we limit God by saying, or ourselves by saying, I am. Something. It also reminded me, right, that in the Torah, it says, how does Hashem define himself? He says, I am as I will be, meaning regardless of what has come in the past, that's not going to define how I choose to be, right? And if we're going to go from a Torah standpoint, there's one pasuk that we say every single day that if you don't have kavanah for it, if you don't have intention, when you say this one pasuk, right, you have to repeat it. What is it? Some random one, right, that says, right? You open up your hand and you satiate the desire of all living beings. And I was thinking there's the main interpretation, but when I was thinking about it, I was like, why is this so powerful that we need to be able to repeat it? And my thought behind it is that if I don't know what I want, there's no chance for God to be able to give it to me. So I have to be very clear as to what I want, right? And if I don't have clarity, then repeat it. Have the intention. Try and understand what it is that you want, so that God can guide you in that way.
I love it. I love it. So now you've given me something to think. I love that idea that God is the giver, and so too we should be the giver. And I think that ties back to what we were speaking before about the media. So I think you have a choice when it comes to media. You could be a contributor, a creator, like what we're doing here with the podcast, creating content, hopefully valuable content that people can enrich their lives, and we would be proud for them to be listening to this content. Or you could be just a consumer, right? And it's very easy and very enticing and very attractive to be a consumer of information on social media and media in general. But the fact that God is the creator and is the giver and gives everything to everyone, that means that seems to argue that that is the better of the two options. Rather than being just a consumer, be very intentional about what you're going to consume. Curate what you consume very carefully. But then on the other hand, be that giver, be that creator, put out into the world. So like social media is this amazing channel that you can put good, edifying thoughts out into the world. So so you've given me something deep to think about. So,
and also Pirkei Avos says, there's givers and takers, and not only that, you can actually take to give as well.
Right.
Right. So if you're taking with the intention of, what can I now use this for, right, and I can give back, then by all means take as much as you want, because the intention behind that is to be able to do something incredible with that.
Right. Right. So that, like in your industry, in your practice, I'm old enough to remember where mental health when people were struggling with mental health, that was something very shameful, and people try to suppress it and hide it. And I think we're now in an era where that is no longer the case, where if people are struggling, they're more likely to reach out and look for that support than perhaps they were, when I was when my hair wasn't gray yet. So but that is what therapy is. It's I need to sometimes I need support, but if I'm to be that father that I need to be, that husband that I need to be, that employee that I need to be, or that business owner that I need to be, sometimes I need to go and I need support.
Right.
So in order to be a giver, that's what you were saying, right? So when sometimes if you want to be that ultimate giver, the optimal giver, you need to be open to, and having support and receiving as well.
Yeah, especially in times where you feel like for one reason or another, you can't do that yourself.
Yes.
Now, it could be something that you were born with. It could be something that you developed. It could be, for a number of different reasons. I would also just sort of clarify that in my experience, there's two different types of reasons why somebody might come to therapy, right? If somebody's in a survival mode, like they're just what we call debilitating mental health issues, where you can't even function, can't keep down a job, can't keep relationships. That would be one reason. And then the other reason is you're surviving, right? But you're definitely not thriving. Now, in that respect, I don't really see much of a difference between a therapist or a coach, unless there's really a mental health issue that they're not fully aware of, right? Now that we're understanding mental health a little bit better and the actual what's happening in the brain, right? Sometimes coaching has its limitation if you don't have the actual understanding of what's going on from mental processes, right? So, for example, I remember I gave somebody who's one of my clients who's depressed, right? And he has depressive episodes, right? And he couldn't understand, like, sometimes I'm so great and I'm motivated and I work around, just sometimes it's so difficult, right? And he's like, he couldn't understand that. And I've had a coach for so long and right? And I was trying to explain to him that there's actually something happening in his brain that limits him from that other experience, from that freedom that he normally feels. And I gave him the analogy that I had an injury when I was younger. So I have 3 herniated discs in my lower back. And if I don't take care of this properly, right, then there'll be a flare up. My muscles will overcompensate, and then I'll have a muscle spasm, and I'm bedridden. And no matter how much I desire to get out of bed, I literally cannot get out of bed, right? And I just have to wait. It's a natural process of now healing again, and there we go. And depression or anxiety in many ways works the same way, right? We could be functioning great, but then there's a trigger, and then our brain just doesn't allow us to operate the way we normally operate. And unless you really have an understanding about that and know how to manage that, look out for that, and have just, give yourself some allowance, saying like, okay, I'm in a depressive state right now, right? There's only so much I can do. These are the things I could do, right? And I gotta basically take it easy, and this is all I can manage, and it's a waiting game right now. Or maybe I should take a look at medication or something a little bit more intense. But it's a lot of it is just really understanding what's happening individually, right? So for somebody who's depressed, no matter how much motivation you give to the person, the chemicals in their brains will not allow them to really move forward. Versus somebody who doesn't have depression, right? Zagazant, like by all means, that might be all they need. So there's some fine lines there as well.
Right. You said before that you in your practice you don't really see children, so that's a little bit out of your purview. So what is who is your ideal client, if there is such a thing? What is your practice like? Who do you tend to see?
Right. Well, the people I tend to see are the people who are naturally come to me either through referrals or what they end up seeing online, which typically ends up being corporate professionals. So people who are on paper doing fantastic, they have their wife, their kids, their dogs, their cottage, their boat, but internally they don't feel alive. They feel like something's missing.
They're not flourishing.
They're definitely not flourishing.
So what is it? So if you have the 1.6 kids, you have the cottage, you have well, if you have 0.6 of a kid, maybe that would be an issue. But you have the cottage, you have all, like you say, on paper, it looks like you're flourishing.
Yeah.
So what is the secret to flourishing? What is the key? What's missing?
So I'll throw it back to you. Safety and significance, what are they lacking?
They're lacking safety and significance.
Well, safety they have, right? Meaning they have the house, they have the spouse, they have the kids, they have the boat, right? They have their trust fund, they have their savings and their investments. They're safe. But for one reason or another, significance, it could be between the relationship, could be at work, it could be with the children, right? It could be somewhere over there, but they're not feeling significant over there. Something is missing there. They don't feel good about themselves in one or all of those areas.
Could you have significance? Is it like kind of a Maslow's hierarchy? Could you have significance without having safety? Or must it be in that order? Like you first really need to take care of your safety before you can work on the significance or develop the significance, or is that?
I would say depending on the type of safety. So if you are unconsciously, if your body is worried, if you're in a fight or flight mode so often because of war or domestic or abuse in the home, right? There's very little. Your body is not regulated enough. It's not calm enough for you to sort of accept what can help you feel significant. It could be you've learned at school I feel very safe, and I can get significance from my parents, but at home forget about it. Like I'm not safe. I'm not like there's nothing about that environment that will make me feel significant because I can't even start that. It could be maybe in this one tiny relationship within the home. I feel both safe with this sibling and significant, but generally speaking, no. Right? So it's very much, from my experience, tied to what are you bonding with? And if you have nobody to be able to actually bond and attach yourself properly to, where you feel significant, that's where addictions will come in, right? Because I forget who it was who said it. This comes from attachment theory, but we used to say that we're social beings. And attachment theory says we're not social beings. We're much more than that. We're bonding creatures. We need to bond. It's an imperative need that we have. And if we can't bond with another individual, we'll start bonding with things that might be not so adaptive, right? We'll start bonding with drugs. We'll start bonding with risky relationships. We'll start bonding with things that are not very conducive to our well-being. Sometimes the things we bond with, like becoming a workaholic or a gym rat, it's a better thing to become addicted to, but it's still not going to solve your problem, right? And that in itself is not a problem. Addictions to me is not a problem. That's just your solution. So the question is, what really is the problem that you're experiencing, which is really, where's that bond? Where are you not feeling significant? And how do you develop that?
This is fascinating stuff. Thank you so much, Dan. This is so incredible. So as you were talking about the importance of safety and significance, I'm wondering how you think AI might be influencing this. So the world of AI, like AI is so superior in its intelligence to humans, even at this stage where it's still in its infancy. So it can do a lot of jobs today already better than human beings, and this is just going to accelerate and get exponentially every month. The progress is more than the previous many years before. It's crazy. So it's going to affect humanity's sense of safety. It must, and maybe even possibly to a lesser degree or possibly not, humanity collectively, our sense of significance. Because if this thing is doing it's driving safer than we can drive, it's treating medical patients better than a human doctor can do, it's doing operations better than a human surgeon, it's arguing cases better than a lawyer can do, etc., etc. Maybe even dare I say, providing psychotherapy.
Within a couple of years, they will be way better as therapists than any therapist today.
Than any therapist today, right?
Yeah.
Because they can draw on all the data that exists in the whole world for that individual client that's sitting in front of them. So how do you think or have you ever thought about how this is going to impact, and how it is impacting already, our sense of safety and of significance?
So, from the safety standpoint, I remember as a teenager, even before I became spiritual or anything like that, I remember thinking that as humanity unfolds, we only really have one of two options: total destruction or total peace. Like there won't be a middle ground, right? Like right now, for all of humanity, we basically had a middle ground. There's war, there's peace, there's war, there's peace, there's peace over here, but there's war over here, right? It's always been a gray zone. And it seems to me, with what's unfolding and the capacity of AI, like I've seen the stuff that's coming out of China and Russia from technological standpoint, like how you can't be scared. I don't know, talking about fear mongering and anxiety. But at the same time, if we as a collective whole can find a way to actually use this and figure out a way to be peaceful, right, then it will be utopic. That's from a safety standpoint. At the same time, there'll always be people who are not feeling significant and they're going to want to hurt other people. And I remember probably about 10 plus years ago, there was a video of a kid in the States who programmed a drone to be able to shoot a gun. Wow. Right? This is like old technology, right? So who's to say like one person can't figure out, with tons of drones and guns and, humanoids, just one kid in his basement can, in theory, take over the whole world, right? With the right access to it. So if we don't figure that part out, forget significance, right? We'll need to figure out
We have bigger
safety.
problems.
Assuming that we're going from a more utopic standpoint,
Yeah.
Significance, it's going to be interesting, because the question is all the things that we used to think bring us significance won't anymore, right? Why do I need to compose art? This can do it way better than me and faster. Why do I need to, paint or draw or do anything, right? Like, why do you need to play baseball? Like, why do you need to do anything? You actually don't need to do anything. And including therapists as well. I give it, honestly, just a couple of years. Wow. I remember telling this to a friend of mine that I personally believe that within 5 years, every garbage collector in the street will be a humanoid. He goes, not in my lifetime. I said, you're so out to lunch, completely out to lunch. But that's neither here nor there. But in terms of significance, it's going to be it's definitely things I've thought about. Just 2 days ago, I remember thinking of like, we could easily get to a point technologically where I could be sitting in front of you, and in theory, I would have no way to know if you're a human or a humanoid. Zero chance, right? And like, am I going to ask?
They're on to me. They're on to me.
Right? Am I going to have to like, prove that you're bleeding? But we can probably pull that off as well.
Easy.
So I don't quite know. I've thought about it. But the question of significance is going to be something that I think more than anxiety and depression, we're going to be moving into more of an existential question of like, why am I alive? What is the point of all of this? From a Jewish standpoint, it's very simple. But from a non-Jewish standpoint, I don't really have a good answer. I don't know how to answer somebody who's facing these questions.
So if there's a spiritual component, if you bring the spirituality into it, that changes the equation. But if you look at it from a purely physical, material perspective, then you're looking at an erosion of safety and potentially an erosion of safety, and certainly an erosion of significance.
Yeah. That would be my assumption until we figure that part out as well. Right. But I think there's going to be there's going to be a point where there's a lot of dystopia before we can figure this out.
Right.
Right. Kind of like planting the seed, right? When you put a beautiful seed in the ground, and this is quite often the analogy that I'll give with my clients. Most of us are seeds just sitting on a shelf, right? We have a potential of being this great, strong oak tree. Right? But we're not. We're just sitting right over here. And we take ourselves and we attempt, that fear. It's like, okay, maybe I'll try this. And you'll plant yourself. And then there's resistance. Oh, I'm in a dark place. This is, I'm so lonely. I don't know what I'm doing. This is really bad. And you pull that seed out and now it's slimy and it's gross. And you're like, oh, now it's worse off than it was before. Over here, at least I was safe. This is horrible, right? But if you allow yourself to go through that process of, the sliminess and the shedding. Eventually there's going to be some roots and then a little bit of a sprout, and you're still very vulnerable. But eventually, if you go through that process, you become a big, strong oak tree that no matter how much force you put on it, you're not going to get knocked down. And I think as a collective humanity, I, 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 I suspect we're going to be going through that. And it's a matter of persevering through that darkness that will eventually allow us to be big and strong together.
So what do you think individuals can do, and collectively as a society we can do to minimize and mitigate the dysphoria that you envisage on the way to that utopic end that we could potentially have? What should we be doing? Like, what should the average person, you who's listening to the podcast, what should you be doing over the next 3, 5, 1 year to protect yourself from what is coming and what is inevitable?
So I would say, as a starting point, is to become as regulated as you possibly can. Understand your own triggers. Understand when you are anxious, sad, ashamed. Try and understand what's going on for you. And the more you understand and really understand, then the healing process can start, because we all have our own stuff that is not ours. We were gifted these things from my experience from childhood or a very acute trauma. That's the only times that we shifted. Going back to the 2 girls who were playing, right? As you said, they were fearless, right? From a biological standpoint, there's only 2 things that humans fear, which is loud noises and heights, right? So how do other kids learn that, this is not unsafe? Because the grandfather is saying, no, stop, you're going to, and then, well, that felt unsafe. So maybe he's right, right? You don't trust yourself, you trust that. That was way louder than what's going on internally. When you're able to start understanding yourself, being able to trust yourself, that's just a starting point. And then once you understand that, it's way easier to start understanding other people. One of the things that I did after October 7th is I understood my side very well, right? But I couldn't understand the other side. And thankfully in the therapeutic world, most people are on the other side. So it was very easy for me to find people of the other opinion. And I went through virtual meetings with, therapists from all over the world who are on the left, just trying to understand what is going on for them, what are they experiencing, right? And where do we go from here? And it's the consistency that I found is so many people focus on the past, right? Well, they were there first. No, they were there first. No, right? But there's no moving forward. So it's one, just understanding, why are you so bothered? And then can you move past that? And then we can start understanding other people a lot better. Me personally, I would come home and I'm just like, I'd see my kids. I was like, I don't even know my kids. I have no relationship with my kids, right? And that bothered me tremendously. I was like, I got a bunch of kids. They're going to end up how I ended up in my teens, right? Disconnected from my parents, not very happy. And so I went on a journey of really starting to understand them. And I just posted on LinkedIn a couple of days ago. I came to work and I opened up my laptop, and a note fell out, and my daughter wrote me. She goes, I love you, da 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 da. She goes, even when you're mad, you're not mean, because you listen to me and you care about me. Something along those lines, right? So I still get triggered, right? But now I understand, okay, I see what's going on, and I can explain, I'm upset, nothing to do with you. I'm upset because this behavior, stirred something up in me because blank, 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 blank. So now I have the language to understand myself why I'm upset, which, if you're interested, I actually hold that anger is not a real emotion. And this is one of the things that I'll always teach my clients, that anger is on a spectrum, right? On the lowest level, it's annoyance, and on the highest end, it's rage. And I learned this because when I went to therapy, right, one of the things that my wife asked me to bring up in therapy is that I have an anger issue. I was like, I don't have an anger issue, right?
I do not have an anger
issue, right? I get annoyed a lot, but I don't have an anger issue. So I brought it up. I was sort of exposed to this idea that even annoyance is actually just very low level anger. And why am I constantly annoyed at so many different things? So, doing a lot of internal search and also just a lot of research, I came to appreciate that anger just protects me from something much more real, right? And generally speaking, there's only three negative emotions, which is sadness, shame, or fear. Again, each one of those has their own spectrum. So whenever I hear somebody, one of my kids, a client say, ugh, like so-and-so and so, right? Or complaining about the weather, right? So what are they actually saying here, right? I'm disappointed that it's not nicer weather. I really enjoy being outside, right? That's probably what they're saying. They're not really afraid of, or maybe they're afraid of getting into a car accident and they can't really stand the winters in Canada, right? So what are they actually saying in between their words? So as a therapist, I'm trying to get better and better and better at really just listening to what the person is saying to understand what the emotion is. Going full circle now and going back to the significance, I think the more we help other people feel significant, seen, heard, understood, and the more we can do it for ourselves, the more we'll have resilience to move forward as a collective whole.
So what do you mean that anger is not an emotion then? I agree there's a spectrum.
Yeah.
But shame, as you said, there's a spectrum. Fear, there's a spectrum. Depression, there's a spectrum. Why would you say that anger is not the fourth leg of that emotional table?
Because anger, the purpose of anger is saying, I'm actually feeling something much deeper. Either I don't know it or I don't know how to communicate it, but now you are, and I'm just trying to protect myself from experiencing more of that pain. And typically when you ask somebody, what are you actually, or if you listen, right, what are you actually experiencing under that annoyance or that anger or that rage? It'll be something, one of those other threes was triggered. Either there's disappointment or there's fear or there's shame. And I've seen this consistently, right? So one of the things that I'll train my clients is when they'll say something like, oh, I was really annoyed. Really? What were you actually feeling? Right? Because I think it's very important for us to be able, as a first step, to be able to regulate ourselves is to understand what's going on inside. And if you're just using the language of anger, which is just there to protect you, you're not going to get really anywhere.
Yeah, I was thinking recently about, how expectations play a role in our flourishing, in our joyfulness, or actually the opposite. So if let's say 100 people apply for a job, okay, and each one of those 100 people has an expectation that they're going to get the job.
Right.
So first of all, 99 people are going to be disappointed. That's obvious.
Right.
But even the person who actually gets the job, the candidate who's successful, they too will not have the same degree of delight and joy that they would have had they not had that expectation. So a lot of happiness is tied up with expectation. And I think that's what one of the things I'm hearing when you speaking of anger. You're saying there's no anger. It's failed expectations. It's not things not happening as you would want them to happen, rather than an emotion. But I'm like,
I would say more than that.
Yeah.
It's not so much that this thing happened and you didn't want it to happen. I would say this thing happened, and if it continues to happen, I'm going to feel more and more hurt or scared or embarrassed, like shame or whatever it is. So you're protecting yourself from that. Look, like if I went to a coffee shop, right, and I said, can I have a strong coffee? And they say, sorry, we only have a medium blend, right? I had an expectation for that. But unless I was relying on having that strong coffee, right, or a bold coffee and all they had was medium, right, or then I wouldn't be, I don't even know if I'd be angry or disappointed, right? I'm like, okay, fine, right? But let's pretend, my window of tolerance is closed and so many bad things happen already, things, things didn't go my way. This might be the thing that sort of throws me over the edge, right? Like many times with people, I personally never really understood road rage, right? Me personally. But I have a lot of clients who have no problem expressing road rage, right? And so when we start going through it, it's, what are you actually getting angry at here, right? And really just exploring that.
Yeah. So I think so much of like what we experience emotionally is, as you said previously, is really dependent on our past and the experiences that we bring in and the trapped emotions that we bring into every experience that we go into. And those parts that we haven't worked through within ourselves fester. They sit there and they fester and they detract from our flourishing. Look, this This is absolutely fascinating. I could keep going for the next few hours. Please, Don, come back on the show at some future time. This has been really, really awesome. So, how would you? I want to leave our listeners with something practical that they can implement into their lives that can boost their flourish, right? So what from all that you have experienced in your formal learning, in your actual practice, dealing with so many people and helping them and supporting them in such wonderful ways, what would you say are one or two practical tips that people could implement today in their life that would help them flourish?
I would start as any time that you are feeling triggered, upset, annoyed, anything like that, just as a starting point, ask yourself the question, is it safety or significance here? Because that will start the eye-opening experience of, hey, there's something that's lacking here, and it's not about you.
Awesome. Wow. What an incredible idea. What an incredible tool. I certainly am going to start trying to do that. Safety and significance. This has been really awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I bless everyone and leave you all, as I do after every episode, that you should find your flourish.